Hey everybody, it's Bob Negen, and I am your host of the Coronavirus and the Independent Retailer podcast. This is episode number 47. So today I'm going to share with you a very important lesson that I learned from my Grandpa Nibbelink. And my Grandpa Nibbelink was an old Dutch farmer from Pella. Actually, he lived out near Peoria, Iowa. And he taught me this lesson when I was in college. And a little background. So last night, Susan's mother's basement flooded. Oh boy. So Joe, Sam, Susan, and I, we were going to go over there and do what we could. And one of the things we knew needed to happen was her heavy wooden furniture needed to be moved. And so Susan suggested that we go to the office and pick up one of our hand carts to make it easier to move this furniture. And I said, no, we got a couple of young, strong boys. We should Grandpa Nibbelink this. And Joe and Sam said, Grandpa Nibbelink this. And lo and behold, there was a story of mine that they hadn't heard. Of course, that made me gleeful, because I'm accused, as you could probably imagine, of telling the same story too many times. So this was a brand new one. And so I'm going to share it with you now and then talk about the lessons that I learned from it. So it was June in, I don't know, the late 70s. I was in college. I lived in this little house, in a poor neighborhood in Grand Rapids, a little house that I bought. And I had a tiny, tiny patch of a garden. I mean, a tiny patch of a garden. It was a small house, small backyard, tiny patch of a garden. And or I was going to make a garden. So I called my dad, who loved to garden, and he and my Uncle Clarence. Now you got to understand, my dad was brought up a farmer. My Uncle Clarence was brought up a farmer. My dad became a preacher. My Uncle Clarence became a preacher and a professor of Old Testament at Calvin. Now it's Calvin University, Calvin College. So both of these guys had farming in their bones. Grandpa Nibbelink happened to be in town at that time. So Dad and Uncle Clarence brought over the rototiller. Big old giant rototiller to rototill this tiny patch of grass. And one other little bit of the story is when I bought this house, I bought this from one of my dad's parishioners, and it was an old widow. She was moving into a nursing home, and her husband was a gardener. And so all of his tools, and I mean, literally I moved into this old Dutch couple's house, lock, stock, and barrel. It was decorated like that, everything. But anyway, so I had a garage full of gold gardening tools. So Uncle Clarence and Dad and I unload this giant rototiller. We haul it up 4 steps into our backyard, and we're fussing with it, and we can't get it to start, and finally, boom, success. The rototiller starts. And we're so excited, we're ready to get to work now. And we turned around, and my Grandpa Nibbelink, who at the time had to be in his late 70s, was just standing there looking at us like we were the dumbest people in the world. You see, what Grandpa Nibbelink did was he went into my garage and grabbed a pitchfork and turned the whole garden in the time that Dad and Uncle Clarence and I were sitting there trying to figure out the rototiller. And so whenever I think of a job that is easier, just getting done, just do it. Don't think about it. Don't find tools for it. Just do it. I call it a Grandpa Nibbelink. And I think that it's really valuable. This is a non-coronavirus episode of this podcast because I just think it's so valuable. I think that a lot of us have an over tendency to analyze, and often the analysis leads to procrastination. And I think that sometimes we have an opportunity, we need to research. I guess that's kind of like analysis. we need to do all these things before we can do that thing. When in actuality, there's lots and lots of the work that you do that can be done just by up and doing it, right? And this is a leadership lesson too, especially, I guess this is kind of coronavirus specific. But right now, there's all sorts of safety protocols that I hope that you are engaging in. Now, on the one hand, you want to create the systems, you want to create the processes, you want to create non-negotiable standards, you want to ensure that your team members are, adhering to your non-negotiable standards. So on the one hand, it is a question of process. On the other hand, it's just a question of just doing it, right? So going back to this analysis, sometimes we just have to put everything into a structure when we don't really need to put everything in a structure. Just do it. So what does this have to do with leadership? If something needs to be done, just do it. If the doors need to be spotted, if your doors are dirty, just go clean them. When your team sees you doing a Grandpa Nibbelink, they're going to start recognizing that doing a Grandpa Nibbelink is part of the things that you do in your business. Something's on the ground, you pick it up. Something needs to be cleaned, you cleaned it. Something needs to be delivered, you deliver it. We're entrepreneurs, we're people of action, but sometimes we get caught in process analysis, procrastination, when the easiest thing is to do like Nike said, and that's just do it. And I think back onto that day in June often. I'm looking at a problem and I'm thinking, I can go here, I can get that tool, I can hire that person. And often I think, no, just Grandpa Nibbelink this puppy, and within 10 minutes, the job is done, the process is done, and I can move on. It really is kind of AA. It really is kind of the AAA mindset, right? Assess, adjust, advance. You see something, assess it, ask yourself, can I just get this done in the next 5 minutes? Because if I can get it done in the next 5 minutes, it's done. I can move on to more important things. So anyway, I shared that with the boys, and there was a story they hadn't heard, and I was like, I'm going to share that on the podcast tomorrow, just because I love that story, and it's meant so much to me, and it's been so helpful to me and my productivity through the years. So this afternoon, Community Forum, 1:00, we have a real safety expert coming onto the Community Forum. It was interesting. Nate, who works for us, said, hey, he has a friend who's in the chemical business and they do all this interesting stuff with cleaning. I mean, they're pros. They are pros. You will get the best cleaning safety information available in the Community Forum this afternoon. So if you're thinking, if you're wondering what you should do and could do to keep your store safe, be there at 1:00. It's going to be live just like it is here. Again, if you are active in Instagram, we would really, really love a follow. We're trying to build up our following there. And I hope that you found it helpful. I love a little way to honor my Grandpa Nibbelink, the old farmer from Pella, Iowa. I sure love that man. He might have been stoic, but he was kind and gentle and wise. And he was everything a good grandpa should be. All right, everybody, I'm Bob Negen. I will see you at 1:00.